Okay, good evening, everyone. Good day, everyone. Welcome to the Community Infrastructure Services Committee for Monday, May 10th, 2021. Due to COVID-19 and recommendations by Waterloo Region Public Health to exercise physical distancing, City Hall is only open for the select service and by appointment only. Members of the public are invited to participate in this meeting electronically by accessing the meeting live stream video at kitchener.ca. Watch now. While in person, delegations requests are not feasible at this time. Members of the public are invited to submit written comments or participate electronically in the meeting by contacting delegations at kitchener.ca. Delegates must register by 12 p.m. on Monday, May 10th, 2021 in order to participate electronically. Written comments will be circulated prior to the meeting and will form part of the public record. And with that, we have consent items dealing with item number 1, which is telecommunication tower land leases. Do we have a mover? Councillor Davey. Any comments, concerns? I seen, Councillor Davey.
Sorry, I know we have some stuff to get through today, and I don't really want to take out a consent. I just want to make a really brief comment, if I could, Mr. Chair, on this. Yeah, I didn't want to let it slide by without noting many of us on council over the years, including myself, have been strong supporters of closing the digital divide. People that are less fortunate, don't have internet access. It's a tremendous barrier for people not only to have Wi-Fi but to have public access to community computers. And I just love seeing these reports come forward where we're going to getting some commercial dollars from the private sector. We're going to be redirecting that towards closing that important digital divide. So thank you.
You're welcome. Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, no, I agree with what Councillor Davey is saying. I just had a question about some of the images that were included in the report, and I was wondering if there were any images of what it looked like from Keele Street.
I'm not sure who would address that. Ms. Rapp?
Through you, Chair, we don't have those images right now, Councillor Chapman, but we would be happy to look at whether or not we can get those and circulate them to you after.
Okay, that's fine, and that's not an obstacle to proceeding with this. I was just curious because that seemed to be missing, but thank you.
You're welcome.
Mayor Verbanovic.
Thank you, Chair Ioannidis, and just want to echo Councillor Davies' comments. I think Council will recall back a couple of years ago when we completed our Digital Kitchener strategy, and digital equity was something that we were talking about, and that was long before COVID-19 and the pandemic, and we realized, I think, over the last 14 months, not just us, but school boards and everybody, quite frankly, how important it is for us to continue to take steps towards digital equity to ensure that everyone has, or that we move towards an environment in a world where everyone has access and equal opportunity. And certainly our partners at Kitchener Public Library have done that with some of the things they've done in partnering with the telcos around being able to borrow access. But of course, that's been challenging during portions of the past 14 months. So this is really another important step as we move forward.
Thanks, Mayor Verbanovic. I think this is fabulous news as well. It's great to see the need is even greater than ever, and it's a win-win for the community, and will generate some revenue that will help even support the cause further. So I'm wholeheartedly glad that this is here and excited to support it. So with that, all those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And then we now move on to our only item on the agenda today with regard discussions. It's dealing with the termite pilot project review. Let's kill it. All right. we have any, and we don't have any comments for any questions from staff at this time as far as presentation. But Councillor Singh, I see that you raised your hand.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'd love to move it. I'm having some difficulty with my computer where there's a section where you can put your hand up for raising, so it's a little bit covered. So I may have to just raise my hand in this video. I'll try to fix it in the meantime.
Okay.
Anyways, I may have some comment or questions after staff present, but I just wanted to move.
There is no staff presentation. They're just here. It's just here for us to. So if you wish, you want to make some comments, go right ahead. You are a little choppy. You want to ask? You have some questions?
I do, if I can.
Okay. I think we have Tim Benedict. Oh, no, we have Mike Sealing here. Go ahead, Paul. Ask your question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we're being rather a little bit quiet on the success that we've garnered from this project. I think we've come a long way over the last 6 years. Initially, when this problem came to light in the Laurentian Hills neighborhood, something that seemed fairly drastic to the neighborhood and individual property owner, and now it seems to have changed considerably to a point where we can say with some I guess confidence that the issue has been eradicated. So that's the question I wanted to pose to staff. So we can have that public dialogue over the last 6 years, the program having run, and the successful results in the last 2 years. The report does outline that. I just
Hey, Paul.
Yeah.
Sorry, hey, Councillor Singh. I apologize for calling you Paul, but we are having a hard time hearing you. Councillor Johnston can't hear you, and Councillor Michaud is saying she can't hear you.
Let me try this.
Okay. I can't hear you at all right now. Maybe you need to switch something on your screen.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, everyone can hear you now.
Okay, all right. I thought my headset would have made things better, but I guess that needs to be returned to Best Buy. So I'll try not to repeat everything I said. Just want to reiterate the program, the success it's had over the last 6 years, and obviously the positive results in the last 2. The report does kind of indicate that it's fair to say that we may have eradicated the problem in the neighborhood. I just wanted to have that public dialogue and see staff's perspective once more. Are they fairly confident that the termite infestation likely has been eradicated in that inner circle of Briargate and Greenock?
Mr. Sealing?
So through the chair, I'll take a stab at this. Tim Benedict is really the architect on the program, so I'll let Tim talk in a couple seconds. But as the report indicates, back in 2015, the consultant that the city retained estimated over 560,000 termites. And as we went through the program and followed the decluttering of the people's properties, installing the bore rate rods in the fences and the wood decks, and the application of nematodes in the spring and fall, we clearly saw from the first year that the number of termites declined, and we were just ecstatic over that. And in 2020, the consultant reviewing all the traps found no termites. So this is a huge success story, as Councillor Singh had suggested. Tim and I are not the experts, so it's hard for us to say we've definitely eradicated, but we've clearly gone down, and we encourage the property owners to continue being mindful of dead wood on their own property and continuing with the nematodes. And I'll turn it over to Tim, because Tim might have some additional tips that he knows from Dr. Miles to add to that.
Thanks, Mr. Sealing. Tim, Mr. Benedict?
Thanks. Through you, Mr. Chair, there really isn't a whole lot more to add to the report other than what we've noted. Dr. Miles is quoted in our staff report to you that it appears the termites have been eradicated. He's not going to commit that they're completely gone, but we're not seeing any activity in the traps, which is drastically different from the first year we ran the program. So definitely the program was a big success. And it's a combination of all the things we did, and that's what we're saying here is if we create a best practice, should this happen with another community, we could provide guidance to that community as to what they could do on their own to help eliminate or reduce the population of termites.
So on a citywide perspective, I think that's the biggest win, that we have best practices now that are tried and tested. But for the perspective of this neighborhood, now that over the last 2 years, we've seen zero capture termites in those traps, will these residents continue to be required to go forward with the treatment? Again, these are expensive treatment process, or the fact that we haven't noticed any termite infestation over the last 2 years, it'll be on their own determination if they want to continue on or what they want to do. Obviously, the city would encourage them to use the best practices we've learned. So what does it mean for that particular neighborhood where we knew that the infestation had initially been?
Yep. So through the chair, that's there is no requirement for nematode, borate, or anything in any of our bylaws. Our bylaw only addresses making the structure of the house termite resistant. So if we were made aware of a structure that was having an issue, the bylaw gives us the ability to require homeowners to treat the structure itself, but not anything that we did in the pilot program.
Okay, all right, thank you. I'll just make some comments afterwards, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, I was just wondering if we know of any other areas in the city that have termites, or how's that being monitored, or how would it come to be detected?
So through you, Mr. Chair, the residents let us know. So we receive phone calls every year, at least a half a dozen phone calls a year, where we send out our termite inspector to go review. In some cases, it turns out to be citronella ants, which look very, very similar to termites. But there are other areas where we have found termites, and we continue to use the bylaw to require homeowners to clean up their property and treat the structure if it needs to be. But now we're in a scenario where we could share best practices with any other areas that we've had success with.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Chair Ioannidis. Just more out of personal interest, this response was something that was one of the first of its kind, I believe, in municipalities. Just wondering if other municipalities that had reached out to our staff to see what we had done and maybe get some advice on issues in their own municipality.
Through you, Mr. Chair, there hasn't been anyone reach out to me directly. I know Dr. Miles does work with other municipalities, and obviously the information he's gathered from our pilot will be helpful to other municipalities as he goes forward.
Okay, thank you. I have a question. So, Mr. Benedict, are you confident that if we do find another area in our community that has a termite issue, that these best practices will be able to eliminate or at least get to the same situation that we have here?
Yes, I'm very confident. This is excellent. The pilot project showed us a whole lot, and this is all things we can do. It's likely you'd want to hire someone to apply nematodes. You may want to hire someone to do the borate, but those are all things that you could do on your own as well. So that's what I like about this, is everything we did, homeowners could take on and do, or hire people to do for 5 years to be sure that the nematodes are being applied correctly, and then you could continue to do it forever if you wanted to.
Okay, that is excellent. Excellent. Okay, so go with you, Councillor Singh, for your comments, and then I will have some comments as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just once more, a static of the results that obviously the pilot project has shown in this neighborhood. I think just a quick recap for some members of council that were not on it. When we initially found this infestation in the Laurentian Hills neighborhood, the initial approach that staff had recommended was requiring the individual homeowner to take up the some sort of treatment process and to cure the property on the inside and outside. This area affected 23 households that was kind of in an inner circle bound by a street all around it. And at that point, it would have been very challenging, I think, for us to have gotten everyone on board, or probably a concerted effort where everyone would have sprayed at the same time. This pilot project has shown us that if there is a strategic approach in a infestation area where everyone works together, not just individually, that we can come to a point where we can, come to a point in time where, the population can be significantly reduced, or I'm going on a limb and still being optimistic and saying that it can likely be eradicated. As the last 2 years results have shown in this neighborhood, that it's captured 0 termites. Going from some 500,000 plus to 0 termites, I think that in itself shows the success of this pilot project. And I'm really happy to hear Mr. Benedict and staff in general from the building department saying that we did learn a lot from the pilot project. Initially, again, if this had been just pushed off as a homeowner responsibility, we would not be at this point where we would have come to a confident best practices approach, where now that we're shifting certain responsibilities to the homeowner, we're shifting that responsibility with some know-how, with some confidence that if you do this, positive results will happen. And I think that was the right direction. And I'm glad that we did the pilot project. I'm glad that this council and previous council supported and continue to support the pilot project over the 6 years to get to a point in confidence that this treatment works and this treatment can work in other parts of the city as well. Happy to move this and happy to support it.
Thank you, Councillor Singh. And to be frank, I didn't have faith that we were going to solve this. And I honestly thought we were going to see this problem continue. I would have, and to have the results that we have today is a testament to our staff, a testament to the consultant that we dealt with Dr. Miles, but more importantly, a testament to the councillor Singh and his determination to eradicate these termites, because I really didn't have faith that we were going to solve this. I thought this was something that we were going to be dragging on and on and on, and it turned out to be a tremendous success story, and just congratulations. And with that, all those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And that concludes today's community infrastructure meeting. Anyone like to adjourn? Councillor Johnson? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Meeting adjourned.
Okay, and we'll take 5 minutes, and we'll start at 2:57, which will become 3. Councillor Ioannidis, you seem to be in a bopping mood.
I'm just dancing to your feedback.
There's feedback? Really? I don't know why. How bad is it?
It's not bad, but it for hours it could be annoying.
Yeah, I can hear it too, Barry.
Barry, mute yourself for a second. Yeah, it's definitely him. Yeah, it's definitely you.
I wonder if it's because they're drilling and doing stuff outside. Like underneath my office.
Not sure.
Well, you guys will be doing most of the talking and I'll be muted, so. I'm just trying to see if there's any adjusting I can do. Is that better? Is that better? No? I think it's the noise from outside then.
It's like a high pitched squeaking, like you know, rail brakes, that type of thing. It stopped now though.
Yeah, it's from outside. Because he stopped doing the work.
To Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to let you know the live streaming is still going currently. So whenever you're ready, Helen will be assisting with that today.
Okay, we're just waiting for a couple more people. We'll wait 2 more minutes and then we'll get going.
While we wait, does anyone know how you can add your profile picture? Like some of the councillors do, like Councillor Gazzola and Schneider?
Yeah, I can tell you. You have to go through your Microsoft account.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Or sign on a Zoom account.
Okay.
And then if you're doing it just the free service and not, that's how it works.
Okay. All right, that's what I thought. Thanks.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yeah, I know that at the end of the last meeting, I left my camera on. I was here, and the host cut me off, closed my camera. Now I just see they're allowing me to turn it back on, so I won't bother you. Thank you.
You should be. Oh, there you're on now, Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I know. They just did the switch a minute ago.
Okay. Okay, well, I think I'll get going. We have quorum, and so we'll call this special council meeting to order. Due to COVID-19 restrictions, City Hall is not open except for very limited services by appointment only. Members of the public are invited to participate in this meeting electronically by accessing the meeting live stream video at kitchener.ca/watchnow. While in-person delegation requests are not feasible at this time, members of the public have been invited to submit written comments or participate electronically in the meeting by contacting delegation@kitchener.ca. Any delegates would have had to register by 1:30 p.m. today in order to participate electronically. Written comments will be circulated prior to the meeting and will form part of the public record. While we normally don't do the land acknowledgement ahead of special council meetings, I thought in light of today's strategic session and the fact that we're focusing on the work of the Mayor's Task Force on Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, it would be appropriate to start with the land acknowledgement. And so today we gather on the traditional territory. Oh, sorry, just one second. I realize I don't have the one that I'm using in front of me. My apologies, everyone. Just one moment. There we go. Thank you. Today, we're gathering on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. We recognize our responsibility to serve as stewards for the land and honor the original caretakers who came before us. Our community is enriched by the enduring knowledge and deep-rooted traditions of the diverse First Nation, Métis, and Inuit in Kitchener today. As the work of the task force has unfolded over the last 2 years, Indigenous participation and perspectives have been crucial. And as we continue to embark on this work at the city, understanding the history of colonialism and acknowledging the need for meaningful reconciliation are integral components of achieving equity and inclusion for all our residents. The first item on today's agenda is a strategic session on the Mayor's Task Force on Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And but before we go to Ellen, who will be leading us in a 10-minute presentation, and then the questions that were part of the report that was circulated ahead of time, I will turn it over to Mr. May to introduce this. And then I think we're going to hear from Ms. Robb with an announcement, and then we'll get to Ellen. So with that, over to you, Mr. May.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm wondering if clerks could pull up the staff presentation. You could just advance to the next slide. So back in September of 2019, the city launched the Mayor's Task Force on Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. The task force is made up of 45 individuals. These are members who are demographically representative of our community based on a comparison to StatsCan's census data for the city. They were each selected to join the task force based on their subject matter expertise, their experience in working in these areas, and most importantly, their lived experience that they brought to the table. A particular focus in the selection process for members of the task force was to ensure that there was ample representation from equity-seeking groups who've experienced oppression, racism, marginalization, and exclusion. Given the significant amount of work that the city has ahead of us in these areas, the task force made the decision many months ago to split into 8 working groups. Each of them would focus on a specific body of work and a specific deliverable connected to our EDI agenda. Over the past several months, staff have supported each of those working groups as they've conducted their work through collaborative dialogue, research into best practices, and in a few cases where necessary, targeted community engagement. The purpose of today's session with City Council is to provide you with an update on the work of all 8 of those task force working groups and to seek your specific input on 3 deliverables, which aren't yet finalized, but when they are, will be brought back to City Council for your final consideration. As we proceeded through this work, we've tried to strike a balance between moving quickly to get work done while also ensuring that we're taking the time to do it right and that we bring the organization along so that it is embedded in our organization and we can be successful over many years to come. I want to assure council that none of the work that we will be speaking with you today will be finalized until we've had an opportunity to engage with our a new Director of Equity and Anti-Racism Indigenous Initiatives to make sure that they are able to help lead this work going forward. So if you can move to the next slide, please. This slide provides an overview of the 8 working groups for the task force, each of them focused on a very specific body of work. As you'll note, many, if not, well, I would say almost all of them are work focused on ourselves as an organization. It's internal work, things like a new equity and anti-racism policy, collecting this and reporting disaggregated data, a new training program for staff, direct volunteers, and counselors. We were very intentional in wanting to look internally first in order to get our own house in order so that we can then go out with some level of credibility to work more closely with the community. I think it's important to note that while much of the work that is displayed on the screen will be done in the coming months, this is only the beginning of our work. This body of work will never end, and it's why it's so important to have a permanent staff presence. For the remainder of today's presentation, Ellen will be walking through a brief update on each of the 8 bodies of work and pausing on specific ones where we would like council feedback. Those being the equity and anti-racism policy, the new training program that we're developing, and a potential new funding opportunity within Kitchener for racialized communities. But before we turn the floor over to Ellen to walk through the bulk of today's update and hear from councillors, I'd like to ask Ms. Rabb to provide an update on one of the first actions that were completed. That was the creation of the permanent dedicated staff team that will help lead the city's work on equity, anti-racism, and Indigenous reconciliation. Ms. Rabb?
Thank you, Mr. May. So Council, you'll recall that in October of 2020, you approved the creation of a 5-person staff team to lead this work, the city's equity, diversity, and Indigenous reconciliation work. And the first goal was to fill the position of the Director of Equity, Anti-Racism, and Indigenous Initiatives. And I'm really thrilled to share with you today that we have now hired that Director of Equity, Anti-Racism, and Indigenous Initiatives, who I will introduce to you in a moment. To support the recruitment of this director, I want to just note that we engaged an outside consultant with expertise in equity-focused recruitment, and the response that we received to the posting was outstanding. We had many excellent candidates apply, and the interview panel also included community members from equity-seeking groups with lived experience and expertise in the gender equity, housing, and homelessness portfolios. Once the director begins at the city, priority will be placed on the recruitment and hiring of the other 4 positions, starting with the Senior Indigenous Advisor. Can we advance to the next slide, please? So it is my great pleasure to introduce to you Suzanne Charles Watson. Suzanne Charles Watson is an equity, diversity, and inclusion specialist living and working for equity, inclusion, human rights, and social justice. She brings over 15 years of experience successfully designing and managing large-scale interdisciplinary research initiatives and developing research-driven, equity-responsive, and inclusive policy in organizations that cross academia as well as healthcare. She has worked with a wide range of stakeholders in international development, academia, government, and civil society to design and implement equity-responsive strategic policy and research initiatives. And she has conducted extensive training on EDI issues, specifically focused on organizational change, established inclusive recruitment guidelines, and she has created and curated online resources for EDI while forging collaborations within EDI spaces across multiple stakeholders. And so at this point, I would like to pass it over to the Mayor to welcome Suzanne on behalf of the organization.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Michael and Victoria, for kicking things off. And Suzanne, welcome to your first meeting of Kitchener Council, even before you officially join us. And on behalf of City Council and our organization. I want to welcome you and say how thrilled we are that you accepted this role at a particularly exciting time for the municipality, but also a challenging time. I think when we embarked on this work some 2 years ago, we knew this was important work and work that we as a council were committed to in terms of moving these issues forward. But then the pandemic hit, and the pandemic, but in fact, very much so brought to light that those who are socioeconomically disadvantaged, as well as people who are part of our Indigenous, Black, and persons of color communities have been disproportionately affected by COVID-19 and its impacts. And so the work that you're going to be embarking on, along with the team that you're going to be hiring over the next while, is going to be so important. And to get someone with your background and experience joining us is something we're very excited about. So with that, I'd like to officially welcome you and turn it over to you in case you want to say a few words.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Thank you to Bob as well as, I'm so sorry. Thank you for the very warm welcome. I'm delighted really to be joining the team at the City of Kitchener, as this work obviously predates me, but I'm really hoping that with the support of you, Mr. Mayor, my colleagues at the city, as well as community members who will be integrally involved in this ongoing process, that we will really be able to move the needle on creating equitable and inclusive spaces for the City of Kitchener. I am excited about working with the task force members as well as the community members as we all work towards making Kitchener a preferred destination to live, to work, to raise families, and to do business. So I'm very happy to be here this afternoon. Thank you very much, and I look forward to officially assuming the post on June 7th. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much. And with that, I think it's now, I'm turning it over to Ellen to start things off. And before I do that, I do want to compliment Ellen for her incredible work over the past 2 years. Council will recall, because this was a project-based role, it was one that went on IDEL at the beginning of the pandemic, and one that we made a conscious decision to bring back earlier because it was work that collectively we felt was very important to continue, even in the early days of the pandemic when we were unsure how things were going to proceed. And Ellen did that and worked through that. And she took some personal time off that had been previously scheduled in the midst of all that, and yet the work continued throughout all of this, along with our 45 committee members who continued to be actively engaged throughout the past 14 months of COVID. And so the work you see today is going to be the result of that. So Ellen, thank you for your immense leadership over the past 2 years, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Mayor Verbanovich. So yeah, as Michael May indicated earlier, I will be going through some of the details that were included in the staff report that everyone received. And so I'm going to start with, if you want to advance to the next slide, please. I'll start with the creation of an equity, inclusion, and anti-racism policy for the city, which is currently being drafted by the task force working group. So this policy will outline specific expectations for leadership and direct volunteers to support the corporate commitment to operating as an organization where racism and oppression are not permissible at either an individual or systemic level. With this commitment is the expectation that as an organization, the city is working on actions to address, mitigate, and eliminate racism and oppression within the organization. And so the policy outlines specific actions And the actions that are listed on the screen here are what that commitment looks like. It's essentially the operationalization of that commitment, which includes the identification and elimination of systemic barriers in programs and services, which would include the systematic review of city policies and procedures from an equity and anti-racism lens, to continually strive for diverse representation of staff through the elimination of systemic barriers in hiring and recruitment, to maintain a dedicated staff team in leading equity and anti-racism work at the city, to provide mandatory ongoing equity and anti-racism training for all staff, volunteers, and city council, to undertake sustained demographic data collection across the corporation, and to ensure ongoing public accountability. So in addition to the creation of this new equity, inclusion, and anti-racism policy that will apply to city staff and direct volunteers, it is recommended by the Task Force Working Group that the Code of Conduct, which currently governs members of council, advisory committees, and boards, be updated as well to reflect the city's commitment to equity, anti-racism, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism, given the diverse constituency that they represent. And so the question that we have brought to council today for discussion is on the next slide. So if you want to advance. So the question is, do council members see a benefit in having the Code of Conduct updated to reflect the corporate commitment to equity, inclusion, and anti-racism at this time?
So the plan is to come to council as we go along with each of the questions, as opposed to go through the full presentation and then come back to them one by one. So we'll deal with this one first. And I see Councillor Marsh, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I didn't know if you intended to sort of go around one by one, or if you just want to go based on hands up.
I'll go by hands up.
Okay, sure. All right, well, I can start us off. So from my perspective, I feel that it's very vital that if we're going to be expecting our staff and volunteers to uphold our corporate commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion, that we as council members need to be a part of leading the way. And so therefore, I fully and wholeheartedly support the idea of updating our code of conduct to reflect that, and even to go so far as to make sure that when people sign up to run for election, that they get a piece of paper that that's included in their package to or whatever, it's online, doesn't matter, just that in their package that it's included so that they understand if they do get elected that this is going to be an expectation. Yeah.
Great, thanks. Some great points there, Councillor Marsh. Next on the list is Councillor Johnson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Verbanovic. And Councillor Marsh, great points. I love that idea of including that for people that are running in future elections as well. And I just wanted to say that I wholeheartedly support this initiative, that absolutely council needs to update our policies and show our own commitment to equity, inclusion, and anti-racism. That we need to be leaders in this, and community what we're willing to do. And the training in that we're doing is wonderful, and I'm learning so much. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Mayor. 100% agree with what's been said so far. We are held to a high standard, and we need to set a high standard. And yes, absolutely. Let's get this updated, and let's all work towards this and make it as good as we can. Let's be leaders. Let's be inspirational in these areas.
Great, thank you. Councillor Michaud.
Yes, I wholeheartedly agree with all the former comments. We're kind of repeating ourselves, but absolutely. I think this is something that, as Councillor Schneider said, we're elected officials. We should lead by example, and we absolutely should be should include this. And as far as Councillor Marsh's comment on election bills, the candidates, yes, that should be on there too. I think that's an awesome idea.
Thank you, Councillor Michaud. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point on the elections, and I know I think the clerk is on the call today as well. I can't remember at election time, is the code of conduct and so on that folks are going to have to, ultimately follow. Is that something that's given out to them as part of their candidate packages? And if not, is that something that you could work, if Ms. Tarling is on the call, you could work into the election process? Ms. Robb, if you can speak to it.
Yeah, I don't see Ms. Tarling on the call, but through you, Mayor Urbanovic, absolutely. We do provide a copy of the Code of Conduct to candidates when they do register. And I think it's a great suggestion by Councillor Marsh to add that to the package.
Okay, great.
So we'll take that away and look at it.
Thank you. Councillor Galloway-Seelock.
A lot's already been said, and I agree with everything that's been said. When I read this question as I was reading the package, my answer was just simply yes, 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 yes. We should be doing this.
Great, thank you. And Councillor Singh.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Rather than repeating the same comments, just want to also say a resounding yes to all the questions, and particularly this. It absolutely has to be from the top down. I think as a council, it's our duty, and it needs to be a commitment that we have to fight, anti-racism and just all around prejudicism. So,
Councillor Singh, we lost you there.
And we have to leave.
Councillor Singh, we're losing you. Can you? Well, actually, your screen is off, so that's not going to help. Do you want to try again? I think we've lost.
I'm done, Mr. Mayor. I'm having difficulty with my internet.
Okay. But we got the general gist of it, which was a yes. Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, I know I put my hand up and then down and up again. I agree that I think this is a very important step to take. And I also look forward to seeing how it's applied and how we take it, not just as a code of conduct, but applying it to the decisions that we make at council and policies that we bring forward. So I think this is really important. And so I look forward to seeing how it, to seeing it introduced more formally. Thank you.
Thanks. And Councillor Ioannidis?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Urbanovic. And yeah, I too, yes to all of the questions. And in fact, there might be some more that I think we could add.
Great, thank you, Councillor Ioannidis. And just from my perspective, I would certainly echo the sentiment that's been expressed by everyone else. I think it's really incumbent on us as a council and on corporate leadership to really set the tone in terms of what's expected within the organization, and how we're going to work towards striving for many of the objectives that we're going to be talking about today, or that are going to be part of the ultimate report that comes back. We made a conscious decision at the beginning of this work that we were going to focus on us as a city and make sure that we're walking the talk in terms of what we do before we can start, asking others to do the same or elsewhere within the city. And so I think there's some steps that we've already started in terms of things like our employee census. but there's a lot more work that needs to be done internally, and sending that signal from the top will be important to the rest of the organization. Okay, so with that, Ellen, we'll turn it over to you to take us to the next part.
Thank you, Mayor Rabanovich, and thank you to all the council members for your support on this. This is outstanding to see. So the next topic that I'll cover is the training strategy. And so currently the city provides some EDI related training to staff through the city's existing capacity training and development programs. So since mid 2019, a total of 587 staff had participated in these trainings. Providing these course offerings on an ongoing basis is a good start to addressing equity and anti-racism, although research has shown that offering voluntary or one-time training sessions on these important and fundamental issues is not an effective way to train staff nor shift workplace culture at a meaningful level. And so one of the working groups was tasked to develop a new training strategy for the city. And we have developed something that is intended to provide city staff, volunteers, and council members with the following in terms of objectives. So the first is increased understanding of the complex issues related to equity and anti-racism in the workplace and in the larger community. The second objective is increased competency to speak to issues of racism and equity and understand multiple perspectives within both a historical and social context. And the third objective is increased ability to provide service from an equity and anti-racism lens for all members of the community. And so the training strategy has been developed with an accompanying implementation plan over 3 years and has 2 streams. One is a voluntary self-selected stream, and the second is a mandatory stream. So the plan will be rolled out in 3 parts with yearly attainable targets set with priority groups, which will be tracked, and the data will be shared publicly on an annual basis. This 3-year time period will allow for the developing, piloting, and rollout of new content, as well as allow for the time needed to appropriately stagger learning programs across the corporation to maximize the impact from an adult learning perspective. And so as you can see on the screen, we have a chart here that indicates the current state of EDI training and what we're trying to capture in this new strategy, which is, moving from a self-directed, ad hoc, one-off, staff-focused model to having something that's self-directed and mandatory, strategic and sustained, multi-year ongoing, and focused on staff council and all direct volunteers. And so if you wanted to move to the next slide, please. So this chart indicates the 3-year sort of breakdown and the different types of training that were deemed necessary by the task force working group. And so this new EDI training strategy includes 2 mandatory trainings for all staff, volunteers, and council members, which includes an introduction to equity. And under that, there's a list of potential categories that the working group is hoping to address with this training. And the second is systemic racism, which is really about understanding white privilege and tools for uprooting white privilege. And then there's additional training for targeted groups, which includes anti-Black racism, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, Indigenous intercultural competency, LGBTQ+ inclusion, and accessibility, disability, and inclusion. And so then once all of the training has been developed, piloted, and rolled out as part of the 3-year implementation strategy, they will run on a continual basis and expand as necessary. And so I'd like to draw your attention to the far right column in the table, which contains recommendations made by the task force working group for council. So in this column, it is recommended that council follow suit with all staff and volunteers in the mandatory equity and anti-racism training. And in addition to this, it is strongly encouraged that council members attend all of the additional trainings within one council term. In the implementation of these trainings, the sessions will be organized through clerks, as we've done before, and would be separate from the trainings offered to staff and direct volunteers, just to clarify. So the question that we have for discussion, if you wanted to move to the next slide, please, is many members of City Council have expressed an interest in receiving additional training and resources in areas related to equity, anti-racism, and Indigenous reconciliation. Does the city's new formalized and multi-year training strategy effectively respond to these requests for council?
Okay, thanks. Thanks a lot for that, Alan. And so we'll, in a moment, open the floor for folks to comment on it. You know, specifically, you know, your reaction to the council piece of the training, but also if you have any reactions to the other. I would suggest to council that one of the things I think we should consider is, in fact, that we as a council commit to actually do all of the training as part of what's going forward. If you know, if we're truly committed to this work, I think it's incumbent on all of us to understand it better, and I think it's also incumbent on us to show the leadership by taking the courses that we want others to take in the organization. And so while we can't necessarily do this, and it's difficult as everyone knows because we're not employees, I think it's a commitment that we could make amongst ourselves, and it would be up to subsequent councils to, if we decided to go down that path, to undo it in the future if they felt that shouldn't be the case. But I can't imagine that. So I just wanted to share that so that council can reflect on that as you're making your responses. So with that, I got lots of people that want to comment. Councillor Schneider, you're first in the list.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, I was going to comment on exactly what you said. I really feel that this should be mandatory for council. We can't ask anything of anyone else that we're not prepared to give ourselves. And I think as the elected officials, as the decision makers, that we have to be on top and aware of everything that those who are doing the frontline work, those who are putting reports together to bring to us to council, we need to be on the exact same page as that, and maybe even a little further ahead if that is even possible. So I would like to see that all these are mandatory for council as well, and that there are updated teachings as well as issues evolve. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Schneider. Councillor Ioannidis, you're next, and then Chapman.
Thank you, Mayor Urbanovic. I'm wondering if Ellen could put back the last slide. Thank you. So this is, I wholeheartedly agree with with Councillor Schneider and what he said. And in fact, this is where I was thinking when I had mentioned in my last comments that we needed more. And I'm not understanding why public facing staff, and I'm not sure what other staff means, but more in particular, why public facing staff are not mandatory as well with regards to majority of year 2 and year 3, because I think that's important.
Someone from staff want to tackle that? Ellen or
Yep.
someone else?
Yes, certainly. So through you, Mayor Urbanovic, great question. So there is a differentiation between those who are in customer service roles versus public facing. And the way that we identified that was that customer service, whereby all of the trainings are mandatory, includes all customer service staff, community centers, mayor's office staff, anyone who works at a counter, and will also include utilities dispatch, INS staff who enter homes, and security and bylaw. So customer service is quite broadly defined. The public facing is defined as employees who have jobs which put them out into the community and may interact with the public, such as fire, parks and cemeteries, or other INS staff, but whose job it is not to directly work with the public. And so this was the decision to make mandatory for public facing the first two, but not all of them, was more based on the practicality and also the fact that their job is not directly related to working with the public.
Okay, thank you for that. I still feel it should be corporate wide, to be honest, and but I'll let my other colleagues see whether or not what they think of that.
Mr. May, you turned on your camera, so it's usually
Yeah.
a sign you want to say something.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good point that Councillor Ioannidis had raised. I mean, it goes to something I said in my opening comments. We do need to find a balance because there are other types of mandatory training that staff have to take, AODA compliance, health and safety. And so we need to balance that with the need to just have them in their jobs to do their roles. But it is a fair point, and certainly other councillors, we'd love to hear from you. And as I said, this is not a final product, so we can certainly look at that issue again.
Okay, I just feel like we as an organization all should walk the walk and talk the talk. So that's where I'm coming from.
Thanks, Councillor Ioannidis. Councillor Chapman, you're next.
Yeah, thank you. I agree that that all of these should be mandatory for city council members. But I also have a question about the 3-year rollout period. Like, is there, like, some of these are really important issues that we're dealing with right now, and I know it can't all be done tomorrow, but is there any way that some of these workshops can be brought to us before the 3rd-year period?
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Mayor, a couple of things. We're going to talk later on about a guide that's going to be created for staff, which is a physical document they'll be able to learn from. But that's not to say that we won't be continuing to do these one-off training like we've been doing. As an example, we've been offering an anti-Black racism course and an understanding Islamophobia course. So those one-offs will continue. This is about the formal mandatory program. And so for a period of time, we'll be running both at the same time.
Okay, well, I would hope that once we get through the first cycle that we can, maybe reduce the time, especially as we get new people hired and as the corporation grows. I'd like to see, the time frame reduced a bit, because 3 years to get on board with all of this seems like an awfully long time to me. But good, great work.
Thanks, Councillor Chapman. Councillor Michaud.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with what everyone said on this as well. Could you go back to the slide again so I could see that? Yes. And what Councillor Ioannidis had said, I think company-wide or organization-wide is important. I think this is a real opportunity for the city to set an example for other organizations, and hopefully, someone will look at what we're doing as a template to move into their organizations and even other educational institutions. This is outstanding, an outstanding initiative, and I'm absolutely right behind it so far. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Michaud. Councillor Johnson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Verbanovic. And yes, I wholeheartedly agree with us moving forward with this. In terms of whether or not knowing right now if it encompasses everything, I don't know that necessarily. It looks great. What I'm hoping for, and I think that Councillor Schneider kind of touched on this as well, is perhaps the opportunity to have a little bit of flexibility. Perhaps there might be things like that. There could be things that come up that we need to add or change to this. So that's the piece that I'm looking forward to here is maybe the ability to go where we need to go to. As well as we do this training. And also thank you, Councillor Ioannidis, that I think it's really important that all of our staff do this. I think that everybody is public facing as an employee of the City of Kitchener. I believe that everybody is public facing, and I think it's important for all of us to have this training. So thank you, great initiative. I'm very excited about it.
Thanks, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I just want to echo the previous comments. Absolutely excited by this as well. And I would agree with Councillor Ioannidis. He's really touched on something important. I think as an organization, we need to set the tone that this is important body of work, not just for public facing staff, but everyone. Everyone needs to get it. It needs to be a corporate culture. And for that to happen, I think it needs to, I know it requires more resource. It may take more time, but anything that's important always does. And this is absolutely important. One point that I do want to make, I'm in absolute agreement on the, the 3-year plan or what's being laid out. But one point I do want to make is that we need to be nimble and conscious that although we are touching on very important points, issues in our society that need to be addressed, example of anti-Black racism, understanding Islamophobia, the indigenous intercultural competency, and of course, anti-Semitism. But there are issues happening in our society that sometimes may not be prevalent before, but all of a sudden becomes an issue. Anti-Asian sentiment right now, which is very unfortunate, but it's happening now. It wasn't something that was necessarily a major issue, but it's important. So we need to be nimble in our approach and add in avenues to address those issues as well.
Thank you, Councillor Singh. Councillor Marsh, you're next.
Yeah, thanks. I want to take a slightly different approach to this. I love hearing what I'm hearing from my colleagues, and I agree we need to do more, not less. But I just think that we need to be careful about assuming here that the training, we want to make sure that the training doesn't assume that everyone's starting from similar vantage points. We have sort of a lot to learn. Everybody could have a lot to learn, but let's be honest, like various people are starting from different points of their own self-reflection and their own learning or unlearning. And so I think that part of what we have to think about here is what type of training are we going to develop? Is it going to be just a seminar? Is it going to be like the AODA compliance? You have to just click through an online, quite boring type of training that doesn't really engage people in that type of reflection and deep learning that they have to do if they're coming from a specific type of space. So I'd like us to think about, trying to have as much as possible more interactive workshops rather than just something that would be rote learning. And I'd like to, as we roll this out and hone it, I'd like us to think about, I'd like to suggest that we think about having advanced level options, like, not introductory, but how are we dealing with things in a more advanced way. And in addition, I want to note that I think that people, not just us as council members, but members of staff would benefit from having a sounding board. So the type of thing where we could have a consultant or a point person who could be like a mentor to say that we could have be able to be paid as a trainer, but be able to have a dialogue to say, well, this issue is coming forward, anti-Asian racism in my community. I've had a resident come forward and ask me for help. How can I help them? That type of like an expert type of sounding board and or consultant, I think would be worthy of consideration. Anyway, thank you.
Mr. May?
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Mayor, it's all great feedback and I really appreciate it. I just want to make sure that I had clarity. This is not a 3-year program that will be done in 3 years. So I love the talk about flexibility and expanding it to more things and more advanced than introduction. This is simply to get us up and running, but it is going to be a training program that will live on for many, many years and will go in many different directions. So I just wanted to add that clarity.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments from anyone else? Councillor Galloway-Seelock?
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly say that I'm happy for that clarification from Mr. May. I think it's important that this continues to evolve and continues to grow. And like Councillor Marsh said, not just beginning entry level or introductory courses, but building on what you've already learned, I think is important as well. And so, but to answer the question, yes, I think that all of these courses should be mandatory for City Council.
Great, thanks, Councillor Galloway. See a lot, Councillor Davey.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just be brief. I like what I'm hearing and what I see here. I do wonder when I look at this list as well, if there isn't an opportunity for perhaps like an overarching education basically on how these things come to be, like how our inherent biases are formed. Because when I look at this list, a lot of the I guess I'll say the worst actors in our community are many of these things on this list, or in some cases, perhaps all of them. They have all the same ignorances and fears. And I think maybe attacking how those things form in your conscience as a collective versus explaining these individual outcomes of how those things form might be beneficial as well. But I just thought I'd comment because I haven't spoken yet, but I'm very much in support of this.
Thanks, Councillor David. And I think you do make a good point, and it certainly, you know, as we start looking at this longer term, I think it starts getting at, you know, your point starts getting at the issue of root causes and what are some of the things that inherently, as we get, you know, work through policy development. I think this was something that Councillor Chapman was suggesting earlier today as well, is as we look at, you know, policy development and so on, what are the kinds of decisions that, you know, we make that potentially, you know, move us in a positive direction versus continuing down the same path that, you know, we've been doing for decades. And so I think that's part of that work as well. The one piece here that I guess I will raise, and I don't know if Ms. Morlack-Silk or Mr. May want to touch on it, but we're talking just about our direct and our advisory volunteers, but not our neighborhood associations and so on. And I'm just wondering if that's something that I mean, it's probably something we need to talk about with them, but whether it's something we should be looking at there as well. And, you know, it may be something that over time we work into our affiliation agreements and so on. I don't know if that's been something that's been looked at.
Yeah, you're absolutely bang on, Mr. Mayor. It is the vision that we would, once this is up and running, engage our neighborhood associations in some dialogue, both, by the way, on the training, but also the equity policy that we talked about earlier. We are already actually working to arrange some anti-Black racism training that will be provided to a few neighborhood association members. So we're on it and testing it, but that is the vision, that once we get our own house nailed down, we'll look to support others.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other comments before we move on? If not, then we'll turn it back over to you, Ellen.
Thank you, Mayor Verbanovich. And thank you everyone again for your support and feedback. A lot of great suggestions and comments. So if you wanted to move to the next slide, the next topic that we've been discussing and focusing on at the task force is demographic data collection. And so as probably many of you are aware, the Ontario Human Rights Commission has pointed out that collecting and analyzing data that identifies individuals by their race, ethnicity, citizenship, sexual orientation, or similar factors can assist institutions or systems to protect and promote human rights, prevent or address systemic barriers in access to service, or to provide equitable service delivery and programs. And so disaggregating demographic data means breaking down information into smaller subpopulations to help organizations understand important trends in risk, access, and outcomes for particular groups. Without the disaggregation of data, disparities in experiences for specific populations, so for example, employment experiences for racialized women, cannot be properly identified or addressed. And so given this, a comprehensive demographic data collection strategy is being developed for the corporation, which is again organized into 3 phases with a 3-year implementation strategy. And so we have identified targets and milestones for implementation over those 3 years. And components of the strategy include explanation of objectives and rationale, guiding principles. We're developing 2 sets of standardized demographic questions, one for individuals and one for businesses or organizations. Training and educational resources for staff, customized FAQs for the different audiences, and proposed milestones for data analysis and public reporting. So the strategy includes a detailed approach for data collection within the following areas at the city. So city staff, city volunteers, service users, delegates to council, community engagement participants, contractors and vendors responding to RFPs, grant recipients, and community center partners. So we don't have a specific question for council for this issue. Mayor Verbanovich, are we continuing on, or how is it working here with this?
Yeah, no, the next question that you have is number 3, unless actually I see Councillor Johnson has a question on this issue. So if you're comfortable, can we have her ask it?
Yeah, I'm fine with taking questions as they come up.
Okay, go ahead, Councillor Johnson.
Actually, it was more of a comment than a. Is that okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you. And thank you so much. I think this is so incredibly important for us to know who is using our services, but sometimes more importantly, who is not. And again, this I love how you separated out for staff, volunteers, our service users, et cetera. I know that we are already doing this, and I think it's so important. We need to have this information so that we know how we're responding to needs in our community, or maybe how we're not doing that as well. So this is so incredibly important, and I am thrilled that this is here. Thank you again for adding this information.
Thanks, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Davey.
Yeah, no, I like this as well. I think it's like, I'm a big data driven guy. I just want to be very clear though, I'm not looking for a response, but the most important data is the data to me that's verifiable. Sometimes self-reported data isn't quite as accurate, I guess I'll say. So I would, when we go through and we're collecting some of this data, I hope the staff does basically have clauses or asterisks in some of the data differentiating what is and can be verified versus what's self-reported.
Okay, thank you. No other questions, so we'll go on then. Go ahead, Ms. Moore-Lake-Silk.
Thank you, Mayor Verbanovich. If we could move to the next slide, please. So the next working group is focused on equity and anti-racism communication. So as Mr. May mentioned earlier, we are working on 2 deliverables related to equity and anti-racism communications, which will also serve as a form of education and awareness training for staff, council, and volunteers. And so the 2 deliverables are, one is calendar guidelines to mark significant milestones publicly. And the second is a resource guide for staff, volunteers, and city council. So I'll just give you a quick overview of the first one, which is a list of significant days, weeks, and months, is currently being built by members of the task force in collaboration with the communications team in order to assist the team in the development of a standardized approach to publicly recognizing significant dates from an equity lens, with a particular emphasis on groups who have historically been underrepresented or excluded from public and community recognition. So for instance, Black, Indigenous, other racialized groups, religious minorities, LGBTQ identified, and people with disabilities. And so this is something that the communications team is already doing a really good job of in terms of recognizing different dates. But what we're doing is helping develop a standardized approach so that there isn't, so that we can follow that approach over time. And also it will be something that will be updated regularly. So this will be part of the team that will be hired in order to support with as well. And so that's the idea, is that the city has something that's in place for that team. And so the second is an equity and anti-racism guide for all city staff, volunteers, and council is currently under development. The guide is being written as a Q&A style reference document for both a general audience, for leadership, including members of council, and corporate communications staff. So as it's intended to help increase understanding of equity and anti-racism issues, and some of the topics that it's covering I have up on the screen here. So equity versus equality, defining anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism, white privilege, systemic racism and oppression, and some of the historical knowledge around colonialism, reconciliation, and the land back movement, so that staff who are working at the city and who are hearing these things and are hearing these things in the community, they will be able to go to this reference guide and find out, like, what is this all about? And, how do I understand this in a certain way? And so it's a very comprehensive guide. And there are going to be separate guides specifically for corporate communications and leadership, which won't be for the general audience, but it's really, the goal for this is very much focused on making it as useful for staff as possible. So the guide's being written directly in response to requests from staff from across the corporation who have expressed a need for resources and educational materials in order to learn more about racism and other systems of oppression and how they may affect their work and how to take meaningful action to address and transform them. So much of this work is new to the organization and is also constantly changing based on social context, political climate, and emerging practices. So even the point made by Councillor Singh earlier about the rise in anti-Asian sentiment, this is an example of how these things change. And, so now we've incorporated this into the guide even since we started developing it. And so this guide is meant to be a point of reference in a long journey towards fostering a more equitable, inclusive, and anti-racist organization. And then once the guide's complete, it will be revised and updated on an ongoing basis. The recommendation from the working group is at least once per year. And this would be by members of the city's Equity, Anti-Racism, and Indigenous Initiatives team.
My mic was off. Councillor Davies, is your hand up from before, or it's now? You have a question?
Sorry, it was from before. Apologies.
Okay, from before. Thank you. Okay, there don't appear to be any. Oh, there is. Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you. So one thing that I see appears in the report, but I just wondered where decolonization fits in. And I bring this up because it came up in a committee that I'm on, and it was people concerned about the decolonization of heritage, which is kind of an interesting concept in the context of heritage buildings, and I'm sure that this will come up more and more in other committees, and I just wondered how or where this kind of fits into what's being proposed here.
So through you, Mayor Vrbanovic. So in terms of the guide, so the terminology around reconciliation, colonization, decolonization is all included in the guide as a reference. And some of the examples that were given, especially around land back camp and the history of land back camp, are in there, but the guide is really meant to be a starting point for understanding, not necessarily anything that will, kind of get to some of those more complex issues. And so I think in particular for those issues, it would be really important for people to use the guide as an information source as opposed to sort of one, as opposed to taking one side or another side or something like that. So I'm not sure. So I think in general, it would be, it's useful so that people can understand even what decolonization is and where it comes from and what it could look like. But in terms of how it applies to specific issues, I'm not sure that that's kind of beyond what this guide is for.
Okay, so when these things arise, where can council and maybe staff go to sort of improve our understanding of these sorts of things?
Ms. McGoldrick?
Like back to you or to the new director, or where do we go? I'm saying this because I'd like to know who to reach out to.
Ms. McGoldrick?
So through the mayor, I just wanted to respond specifically to Councillor Chapman's example that she provided. And certainly there's not necessarily one team that owns this work. And what we're seeing through the work around reconciliation and the intermunicipal partnership is that there are so many opportunities being identified around where work can take place. And so you had mentioned specifically heritage, and that's an active conversation around where there are opportunities to rethink our approach to heritage. And so that as opportunities arise and as members of council see opportunities, I suggest you reach out to various staff across the organizations who hold those areas within their portfolio, and certainly the new equity, anti-racism and Indigenous initiative teams would also be a good place to start.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Chapman. Ellen, back over to you.
Thank you, Mayor Verbanovich. If we could go to the next slide, please. So one of the working groups has been focused specifically on hiring, recruitment, and promotion at the City of Kitchener. And so in January 2021, an external consultant was hired to conduct an equity audit of human resources, policies, and practices pertaining to recruitment, hiring, and promotion within the City of Kitchener. The purpose of this audit is to investigate, identify, and address barriers to inclusive HR practices and help city staff identify and prioritize solutions specific to the City of Kitchener. So the equity audit includes information gathering, data gathering, gap analysis, facilitated dialogue and interviews with staff, and facilitated workshops with HR staff, hiring managers from across the corporation, and the corporate leadership team. In the input gathering process, staff members from across the organization were asked to participate in either an interview or workshop, including, as I mentioned, HR staff, hiring managers, and staff who are members of racialized and other equity-seeking groups. And so at project completion, a detailed report will be submitted by the consultant outlining key findings and recommendations to bridge the gap between current and target state, which includes an approach to change over 3 years, highlighting priority areas of focus, and an 18-month action plan prioritizing specific actions for immediate implementation. And so this audit is being done specifically in HR, but of course it is very much connected to all of the other work that is being done right now. And so we are collaborating with the consultant in terms of the other things that are happening with the policy, the training, the communications guide, sort of it's all connected, even though they are focusing specifically on HR, because when it comes to doing this work, as you know, was mentioned earlier, this is really a long-term process, and it has to be very interdisciplinary in terms of doing many things across the corporation. And so, so we will be getting that report shortly from the consultants, and that's something that will also be finalizing at that time. So it's not nothing has been submitted or finalized yet.
Great, thanks, thanks, Alan. Councillor Davey.
Thank you. Just two questions. One section goes back a bit, but first question is the equity audit, is the HR equity audit something that is either going to come back to council or will be made public?
Through you, Mayor Verbanovich, yes, it is something that will come back to council when we get the recommendations from the consultant. That's something that will be brought back to council for briefing, and depending on the actions that are being recommended, whether we need council consideration for. So, but it will be coming back eventually.
Oh, very good. Okay, yeah, I'm very interested to see.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
through you, Mr. Mayor. If I can just add to that, having seen some of the early thinking on that audit, I don't expect that there will be decision points for council. I think that they'll be operational and within staff's authority to do so, but in the interest of sharing the information, we would definitely be doing that.
Okay, thank you. My other question, actually, Mr. Mayor, I think is for you. I just want to make sure, I think it was the second slide of the presentation. It made reference to the mayor's task force. I just wanted clarification. Reference to the mayor's task force being demographically representative. But in the report, I thought it stated that it was, the task force was made up of people that are equity seeking. So it can't be both. I just wanted to clarify that.
No, it's not both. It's demographic. We compared the makeup of the demographics of the task force to that of the StatsCan profile for Kitchener. So those matched when we began the task force.
Okay, so the demographics of the task force match the demographics of the city, right?
That's right. That's
city
right.
of Kitchener. Okay,
Yep.
so I thought I read, for example, like it's 70% female, for example, which I don't think is the case in Kitchener.
And so the other point I would make, I think maybe the point that you're referring to, and maybe we didn't write it clearly enough, was we did take extra steps to ensure that those equity-seeking individuals were aware of the opportunity, applied, and were selected.
Okay, and again, I'm no criticism of that. I just want to be clear on it because clearly that's the group we're trying to address. So I just thank you.
And I would also say that it's fluctuated over time through COVID. As you can imagine, some people have stepped back from the task force. They've got other more important things in their lives. Honestly, if we were to do it all over again, I think we actually would have oversampled. We wouldn't have matched it to the city's StatsCan profile. We would have oversampled and brought in more people from those communities that are traditionally marginalized. So it was a great lesson learned for us going forward.
Very good, thank you.
And I think the other point that goes with that is there's going to be ongoing work that needs to be done where there'll be lots of opportunities for people to become engaged and be involved. Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, I'm just a bit puzzled with the use of the expression equity audit, because to me it seems that what we're actually collecting is a diversity audit to determine what we actually have in-house and where those gaps, etc. But so maybe can you just clarify what the difference would be and why we're referring it to equity audit and not diversity audit?
Who wants
Sure.
to take that?
I can take that through you, Mayor Verbanovich. Yeah, great question. And I don't know that there is, it's referred to as an equity audit more because of the processes that they are looking at in terms of whether the processes are equitable. And so we're looking at like what in terms of hiring, recruitment, and promotion is an equitable process versus an inequitable process, which means that is it available and open to and accommodates for everyone, or does it not? And I'm not sure that a diversity, I think the term diversity is often associated strictly with people who are racialized, and we're not just looking at that. And I think that this organization that's working with us, their entire approach is based on, focused on equity, even though, of course, diversity means everyone too, but I think it's just been so associated with that they're focusing really on what an equitable approach would be. And looking at, so when they were, for instance, in the data collection that they were looking at, they did look at the staff census that we'd already done in terms of who's working for the city of Kitchener in terms of demographics. But they were very much focused on the policies, the procedures, those kinds of things, and looking at it from an equity lens in terms of, who gets left out based on this or who gets left out based on that, as opposed to just looking at like what we have in terms of representation right now.
Yeah, no, I totally understand the approach that you're describing as an equity lens approach, I still just question the equity audit. Like the audit itself is more an audit of diversity. But anyway, that's fine. I mean, this is a technicality, and I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Moving on then to the next item. Ms. Morlake-Silk.
Thank you, Mayor Vabanovich. So if we could move to the next slide, please. So as Mr. May referred to at the beginning, 6 of the working groups of the 8 are very much focused on the internal organizational working. So we're looking at what can we do within our organization to make changes. And the last 2 working groups that I'm going to be focusing on are community focused, and they're driven based on needs and voices that we've heard in the community that people who are on the task force thought were very important to address right now, particularly given, once the pandemic hit and a lot of the things that were raised in the community, we thought, okay, how can we address these within the task force? And so one of the working groups was focused on developing a funding opportunity specifically for Black, Indigenous, and other racialized communities in Kitchener. And so as outlined on the screen here, the objective of this funding opportunity was identified as a permanent funding opportunity for groups or organizations run by Black, Indigenous, and other racialized community members to support community-led programs, initiatives, or events meant to decrease inequities and increase opportunities and well-being for racialized communities in Kitchener. And so the need for this kind of funding opportunity was developed in response to community calls for increased support for Black, Indigenous, and racialized groups for their own vital community-based support systems. Recent events related to anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism, as well as anti-Asian racism that has been on the rise, have come to light over the past year. And they may have been a catalyst for this community call to action, but there is ample evidence to indicate that inequities have long existed within organizations and systems, and that these inequities have had consistent, disproportionate impacts on particular groups. For instance, studies show that those with the poorest measures of health and well-being in Ontario identify with one or more of the following groups: African, Caribbean, or Black, First Nations, Inuit, or Métis, and refugees. So when developing this new funding program, the working group was particularly focused on decreasing barriers for racialized groups, as it was acknowledged that historically multiple barriers have been experienced by Black, Indigenous, and other racialized groups in traditional granting processes, including those administered by the City of Kitchener. An important consideration for this working group was in the recommendations made for the selection process for this grant, which includes a committee to be assembled of 8 to 12 people that would include Black, Indigenous, and other racialized members of the community, as well as supported by city staff from the Equity, Anti-Racism, and Indigenous Initiatives team. And so I have included a draft outline for your review as part of the staff report, attachment A. And if we wanted to go to the next slide, please. So having reviewed the draft outline of the proposed community funding opportunity for Black, Indigenous, and other racialized groups, what suggestions for improvement should staff consider before bringing the proposal forward for Council's consideration and approval?
With that, any thought from members of Council? Councillor Marsh.
I think it looks good. I think it's a good. I'm wondering if you would want to improve it by explaining the minimum and maximum amounts. I mean, for having, if there was a small ad hoc group that wanted to do an event and or some kind of initiative, and they didn't need a whole $1,000, could you maybe help explain why you have a minimum $1,000 in there?
Sure. Through you, Chair, Mayor Vabanovich. So we did do some targeted community engagement when we were preparing this. And we did have actually initially a lower minimum requirement or minimum amount, but we heard from the community that often anything under this amount is really just not worth their time or the effort to put in to do that. Like, it's the bureaucratic elements involved in often applying for grants is something that, you know, is very much a burden, especially for small sort of grassroots organizations. And that they all of the feedback that I received from people that I reached out to in the community said that it needs to be higher, that and so that came directly from the community.
Okay, great. And I'm just wondering, do you have in there that it could be potential mix of actual cash and in kind, or is that clarified in there? I just missed it.
Yes, through you, Chair Babanovich. We are following very similarly to the Love My Hood approach, as you can probably see by this. So that is something that isn't written directly in this summary because we tried to shorten it as much as possible for your review, but certainly that is going to be in there. So it can be in kind in terms of event space or use of space or other kinds of in-kind things that the city can offer, as well as money.
Okay, great. I think it's a good start. Thank you.
Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Mayor. I notice in the application process, it says applications will be done through a simple online form consisting of questions relating directly to the criteria. Just wondering, like, who is responsible for putting those questions together, and will the questions too be vetted through the committee?
Through you, Chair Babanovich, yes, the questions would be developed in collaboration with the members of the selection committee. So once we have, you know, and as I mentioned, we are very much following a similar process to the Love My Hood grant. So we already have something that's fairly simple and that we can use as a draft, but we would be doing this in collaboration with the Equity, Anti-Racism and Indigenous Initiatives team, as well as the community members who would be part of that process. So it would be something that would be vetted quite collaboratively amongst all of those people.
Oh, that's great, because I just, you know, would love to see when someone gets to the application process and the questions that they find them all, you know, applicable and good and well thought out. Thank you.
Yeah, and we will certainly be doing additional community engagement as part of that, just as a way of similar to what we've already done in terms of what makes most sense for you, what kinds of things are typically barriers that we can leave out versus what can we actually put in that would make sense. And so that's really the focus here, is to make it, again, as relevant to the community as possible.
That is great to hear. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Councillor Schneider. Councillor Chapman.
Well, thanks. My question has to do with, I mean, I understand the sentiment of what you're doing here, but the one group or that seems to be missing, and although it's mentioned throughout the report, is the disability group or community. Is there room in this appendix or attachment A to include them, or is there something that would be more specific to them? Or I just wondered why they don't appear as a eligible grouping.
Through you, Chair Babanovich, thank you, Councillor Chapman. A really great question. And I actually just recently had a really good conversation with one of the advocates for people with disabilities on the task force about this specifically, because you're right, it is something, I mean, when it comes to, you know, health and well-being in society, people with disabilities are very much on the bottom, as you know, on the same level that Black, Indigenous, and other racialized groups are as well. And so we talked about how, you know, so the purpose of this grant is specifically for racialized groups, and that comes from responding to the inequities and the disproportionality that those groups have historically experienced, and that this is directly for them. And so in terms of, but we did talk about how this could be an opportunity for people with disabilities to advocate for something particularly for them in terms of like what it could look like, or it could be something, you know, that's different, that might not be the same. And that from an equity perspective, I mean, equity work is about focusing on specific groups who have very much experienced inequities in society. And so it's difficult sometimes to make those decisions, because it's like, you know, then we get into the argument of equality versus equity, where if we're giving it to this group, we should also give it to that group. But, you know, when it comes to equity work, this is something that, you know, we're hearing very clearly from the community, and that this is something that we don't want to necessarily open it up to other groups because of the demonstrated need that comes from this group. And that's what equity work is, you know, focusing on those groups in particular.
Yeah, no,
so
and I'm not trying to
yeah.
undermine what you have here. I think what you have here is very good. I just wondered if there would be an opportunity either to include the disability community or come up with another fund. So I know this is, you know, this can be modified and worked on further, but and for not for a moment am I trying to take away what you've got. I'm trying to add on if that's.
Thank you. That's
possible.
appreciated.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Councillor Chapman. Councillor Gazzola.
Yes, I wonder if you can help me understand why it's necessary to have a duplicate process for this. And does that mean that there will be many duplicate processes for all the things that the city is involved in?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, perhaps Councillor Gazzola, you could clarify duplicate of what, and then I'd be happy to answer your question.
Well, it appears to me that what you have here is the exact same as the Love My Hood program. So it seems that we have.
So through you, Mr. Chair, I'm glad I asked clarification, because I would never see this as a duplicate to Love My Hood, although there may be some that would argue it's a duplication of Tier 2 grants. So in terms of Love My Hood, this is very targeted at a specific group of people that we know through any social determinants of health have outcomes worse than others. And so this is about getting money targeted to the people. It's equity. It's exactly what equity is, as opposed to equality, which would be, you know, let everyone have a fair share of it.
Okay, thank you. One other question. In reading the report, can you help me understand what the Western colonial business model is? What is that?
Who wants to take that?
I can take that. So through you, Mr. Mayor. So I think you're referring to some of the barriers that were mentioned in the report that have been faced by racialized groups. Is that correct?
Yes, on the top of just under recommendation number 8 for youth mentorship program, it mentions the Western colonial business model that shapes the way we do things. So I don't know what that is. Should I know that?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, so that refers to, it was part of a conversation that was specific to Black and Indigenous and groups who were talking about basically the concept of decolonization and what it looks like in terms of the Western colonial business model, which is coming from a individualized capitalist approach of doing things, which are very much focused on particularly outcomes that can be measured, measurable outcomes, also financial gain, things that where when you do a project, there should be something that you can actually measure that benefits you, and particularly, even from a financial perspective, maybe even financial gain. And so there was a discussion around how this doesn't necessarily fit with Indigenous, Black, or other racialized groups in the way that they organize themselves or even want to be organized. And so there was, this was part of a bigger discussion of how, sort of the way that our society has been based on this sort of white, sort of capitalist way of thinking, which is very much not necessarily in the same vein as some of these other groups operate. And so looking at different ways of doing things was really the suggestion here.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Those appear to be all the questions. Ms. Morleg-Silk.
Thank you, Mayor Verbanovich. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So this, the last group that I'll cover here is the 8th working group, which is focused on developing a youth mentorship program specifically for low-income youth across the entire city, sponsored by and or facilitated by the City of Kitchener. And so this development is underway, and there's some considerations that have been raised, which are, which we just kind of talked about. Some of the barriers that have been faced. And so looking at what the communities are saying they need is a really important part of that process. And so, what kind of decision-making can come from the community versus can come from the City of Kitchener, and whether the city could provide partnership or support rather than direct facilitation. So these were some of the things that came up, in addition to, some of the other things like the Western colonial business model and how that might not work for certain groups. And so some of the questions are like, how can we put decision-making in the hands of the community? Is it possible to do that and let the city be the enabler? Could this be a partnership opportunity that was community-led and city-funded? And so we had, this working group was really focused on identifying barriers, identifying considerations, and then next steps. And how do we develop something that's for the community, that's based on what the community's needs are? And so the recommendations within this working group is that we needed to conduct targeted engagement with racialized and low-income youth and community members in order to hear directly from them about what they want to see in a youth mentorship program. And so attempting this engagement was begun, although it soon became evident that this was not feasible in the midst of a pandemic, as this is a difficult time to be conducting community engagement with organizations and communities who have been especially impacted by the effects of COVID-19. So we haven't been able to do that engagement as of yet, but we have developed a series of recommendations for this engagement, and that will be something that will be passed on to the director of the Equity, Anti-Racism, Indigenous Initiatives team for them to do once, at a later date where the city can best engage community members for this dialogue. And so an environmental scan has been started, questions have been drafted, and potential strategies, tactics, and tools have been identified. And so a lot of work has been put into this from members of the working group who are from a lot of these groups. And so the next steps for this would be to, focus on that engagement once the ability to do that kind of engagement is there. And then that will be something that will be taken back to council at a much later date once it's drafted.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ellen. There don't appear to be any comments or questions on that one, so thank you. So do you have any sort of wrap-up comments? Because I know I need to go to Mr. May for the wrap-up, but do you have preliminary wrap-up?
I do. I have there's one more slide that I will go through. So if we wanted to just go to the last slide, please. So just some next steps. So the recruitment of the Equity, Anti-Racism and Indigenous Initiatives team will begin once the director begins their position. And that's something that I believe will be focused first on the Indigenous advisor role. Next is to take all of the feedback that I've gathered today back to the working groups for discussion and revisions. And there was some great suggestions made and some good points on, that will lead to some further discussion. Finalize the work of the task force. So the task force will be wrapping up at the end of June, and then bring forward specific deliverables for council consideration, such as the policy, and by the sounds of it, in addition to that, the code of conduct that we will be revising as well and making recommendations for. And so thank you very much for your time today and for all of your engagement. This has been really great and also very encouraging to have such support from members of council.
Thanks, Ellen. Looks like we have a question from Councillor Chapman before we go to Mr.
Yeah.
Mayor.
Yeah, thanks. Can you just go to the previous slide? I thought we were going to have a question thing, so that's why I didn't comment. I think this is great. I just wanted to say that because I think it's really important to find ways to engage youth and bring them in, and because we can learn so much from them. So I just wanted to thank you for this part, and I think it's very important. And the approach that you lay out is, I think, also very very good. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thanks, Councillor Chapman. Mr. May. Well, before I go to you, I just want to once more take this opportunity to thank Alan, not only for leading us through this, but for all the work that has been done over the last couple of years. I think council has a really strong sense now of what the committee has been up to, and the work that's been done. I do also, in thanking Alan, want to, in particular, thank all of the task force members, and we'll have an opportunity to do that when the final report comes forward. But also acknowledge both Councillors Marsh and Singh, who have been council's representatives on the task force, and doing some great work from that perspective. So thank you to them as well. And now I'll turn it over to you, Mr. May.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for stealing everything I was going to say. So
sorry.
I'll be real short. Members of council, we really appreciate your feedback today. It's always great when there seems to be so much alignment between councillors and also between council and staff and the volunteer members of the task force. I think we can move this work forward pretty quickly and get back to you in short order with some final approvals. I do just want to stress what a great asset Ellen has been over the past couple of years. You will have seen the work that she's done to support the task force. What you wouldn't have seen is the amazing amount of work she's had to invest in supporting me as a sponsor for this work. And so I just want to thank her so much for helping me in my journey. And then finally, you'll start to see a transition as the task force wraps up its work and brings some of these back. You're going to start to see Suzanne, who I believe starts work in the first week of June, and her team lead this work. And so there will be a transition over to Suzanne and to Victoria as the department head for corporate services. But that doesn't mean that Ellen or I won't continue to help move this agenda forward. So thank you all for the great discussion today.
Great. And Mr. May, I do want to take this opportunity to also acknowledge you for your role as the, I forget what the formal title is, the corporate champion or the, I know we have an internal title for those, for the roles that someone on CLT, the CLT champion, I think it is, for this work and this initiative. Your leadership in this from the beginning has really not only helped us as a council, but I know also your CLT colleagues and others in the organization to move this this bar forward and advance this important work. And I know Miss Rabb is anxiously looking forward to continuing it now with her team in the months and years ahead as Suzanne starts and builds out the rest of her team of individuals that will be doing this work. So Victoria, you came on. Are you looking to say? No, okay. So thank you, Councillor Marsh. You had your hand up.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning the volunteers who helped to form this strategy. I think it's really awesome. And I just want to make a quick comment. In addition to your thanks, I want to just add that we talked about the demographic makeup of the task force, having percentages that are reflective of our community, but I can say that the task force was made up of 100% passionate people. There was a lot of really amazing conversations, and I was privileged to learn a lot throughout the process. So I just wanted to say that, and I hope that we'll be able to someday thank them in person, but in the meantime, we can thank them virtually.
Thanks, Councillor Marsh. So with that, I will take Councillor Gazzola. You have a question?
No, I have a comment.
Okay, go ahead.
You could let me comment first.
Well, that's you're.
It's okay. Don't. I've been somewhat silent today. I don't mean to be. I really have done I think I've done part of my homework on it. I read this morning's horoscope and it said impulsive, rash actions could create a problem for you today. And that's not your style because you like to give things a sober second thought. So I have to be. I really am struggling with this whole issue because I don't understand it all. Okay, I'm sorry, and I think I've learned a lot over my 83 years, but I have a great deal to learn. Okay, my experiences just haven't been the same or something, and as a youth, I didn't see this problem. I grew up in a small community in southern Ontario. There were very few people of color, very few Indigenous people. I had encountered with them in some sports activities, but that's all. There was no other community functions where we would participate in together. So I never learned a lot of the bad things that have come out in the past 50, 100 years. I didn't learn them and it didn't help in that I really was only one notch above the group, being as my parents had recently come from a European country that was at war with 95% of the families of the people that lived in our community. Okay, and that I could understand how things happen and what happens in society. and to boot, I was a Catholic. That didn't help matters at all. But so I really haven't experienced these things, and so I have more than everyone else to learn. I then went on, and I want to make a point that before becoming a member of council, I spent 45 years in the workforce. And that's not to say council isn't any work, but that's what they call the workforce. And in 43 of those 45 years, I was in a management position. So I've had to deal with these issues for many years. I always thought I did things fairly. I realized the issues that are before us today, quite frankly, I didn't see that many issues as I dealt with them. Over the years, yeah, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. So I don't know. I didn't have those sorts of problems, but I can appreciate how they come about. I feel good in the way that being in management over that period of time, I've had to hire and fire a lot of people, and I'm pleased to say that a lot of the people that I had to fire, we were still friends in life after that. Those occasions, which are pretty unnerving. If you've ever been fired, you would know what it was like. And but we continue to have close social and friendship relationships after that. I take pride in that. When I was in public practice in accounting with a large, major accounting firm in this community, I hired the first woman, and the woman didn't turn out, but that wasn't because she was a woman. She could have been a man. She could have been anything. She just didn't have the attributes to be a good bean counter. But I want to say that since then, in the accounting profession, the majority of people in leadership, if you look at all these large firms, they are the at least half of the people in those firms are that are partners, which is the top that you can get in a professional firms. Half, if not more, today are women. So I think that there have been improvements made over the years. Yes, there's still a long way to go, and I hope we can get there. I've had problems. I have struggled with the concept of quotas. Tokenism, I don't like. That's an insult to very capable people. I don't. The other thing that I've always felt that the best person should get the position, should get this or should get that. That I guess is a question that has to be dealt with at this point. I just hope, and to.
If I can ask you to wrap up because your 5 minutes is up.
I've said nothing all afternoon. Indulge me in giving me 2 extra minutes, okay? I'm sorry. I just want to. Now you've. I just hope that in going forward, we don't upset the apple cart. I hope that 2 wrongs don't make a right. I hope, I want to, you quote Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who said, she says, I ask no favor for my sex. All I ask of our brethren is that they take their feet off our necks. And that is so true. But I hope in doing that, we don't put our feet on somebody else's neck. I can espouse everything that's been said today. Now, they even put those questions before us. Who can say no? Come. Now, there's only one answer to all of these questions. I will give it my total support going forward, and I wanted to make that clear because I didn't say a great deal this afternoon, but I wanted to assure everyone that I am totally behind everything. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Gazzola. There's 2 other people that want to comment, but before they do, I really feel I need to respond to the issue and to some of the things that you said. And I think it's fair to say that everyone here is at different points on their learning journey on these issues, and that all of us have experienced life in different ways. but all except for one, in fact, on this council are not even persons of color. And the reality is that none of us can experience those things for that very reason. We're not Indigenous, we're not Black, we're not persons of color. And so we don't know what it's like to walk a mile or even a block in their shoes, quite frankly. I think, you know, when you reference upsetting the apple cart, the reality is the work that we need to do will upset the apple cart. It needs to upset the apple cart, because if we don't, things won't change, things won't get better. And I think that was the point behind what we saw last year and what we've seen throughout the pandemic of people raising these issues around why we saw things like the Black Lives Matter March and so on, where everyone, people of color, Indigenous people, Black people, and yes, white people are saying we need to do better as a society. And so, you know, I know this is going to be difficult. This is difficult for everyone. But I encourage you to, you know, regardless of what stage any of us are in our lives, to continue to have the courage to learn, to listen to Indigenous, Black, and people of color, to listen to women and the things that they're dealing with. I mean, it's unbelievable, you know, even right now in our own community, someone like Mandy Bujold is having to fight to just have the right to compete at the Olympics because she took a break to start a family. We, you know, many years ago were supportive of the work that Councillor Galloway-Seelock was doing around getting legislation changed so that women can actually serve on councils and not have to worry about getting a leave of absence. So there is a lot of work that needs to be done. It's uncomfortable work, but we all need to rise to the occasion to deal with it. Councillor Singh, I don't see any other hands up, so I'll let you have the last word.
Yeah, just very quickly, there's a lot to unpack here, but I'm glad to hear that Councillor Gazzola hasn't faced or seen too much prejudice or racism. So obviously he, you know, he's questioned the necessity of the work in the past, but I'm very happy to hear that he will support it. And then I think shows well that hopefully this will have unanimous support. But I just want to say that racism, prejudice, you know, just, you know, any aspect of hate is hurtful, it's painful, and it harms our society. So it's not about any of this is hard work, it's necessary work. It's absolutely right, it's easy to do nothing, but it's brave to do what's absolutely necessary and right. And bringing a light to issues where, you know, a minority faces but may not have an active voice, it's absolutely necessary for us collectively, us as a government body, to shed light, to place necessary resources to make things more equitable. Not necessarily just equal, but more equitable. I'll just leave it at that. I'm hoping and glad that there will be likely unanimous support. And I think this is a first step of many to reconciling, you know, past hate, reconciling past prejudices, reconciling past indifferences, and moving on a positive road forward and bettering our society and our community. So.
Thank you, Councillor Singh. We have two items on the caucus agenda. Somebody want to move that? Councillor Ioannidis, Councillor Johnson. Sorry, just hang on one second. Oh, yes, okay. So all those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. We may need to come out of caucus with one item from special counsel, so we won't do 3 readings until later on. So a motion to adjourn. Councillor Chapman, Councillor Davey, thank you. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And we'll take, people need a bio break, 5 minutes. But let's keep it to 5 so that we can get started. Thank you.